before the first word of revelation descended upon the earth, before the Cave of Hira, before Jibreel alayhi salam, before Islam spread across continents. There was a man walking through the markets of Mecca. The morning air is still cool. Merchants are arranging their goods. Leather hangs from wooden frames. Sacks of grain are stacked beside bundles of cloth brought from distant lands. And among the traders moves a man who attracts little attention at first glance. He is not a king, not a military commander, not a tribal chief. He carries no crown. No throne waits for him. Yet decades later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will choose this man to carry the final revelation to humanity. The question is not merely who he was. The question is what he was. A merchant. And that raises something worth sitting with. Why did the final messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spend so much of his life in commerce before revelation ever arrived? Why trade? Why markets? Why contracts, caravans, and journeys across the desert? Was this simply the environment into which he was born? Or was there a deeper lesson hidden within those years? Because when we examine the Seerah closely, something remarkable begins to emerge. The years before revelation were not empty years. They were years of preparation, years that would shape a man capable of carrying the greatest responsibility ever entrusted to a human being. To understand this, we must first understand the world of Mecca. Modern people often imagine ancient Arabia as isolated and simple. It was neither. Mecca sat along important trade routes connecting regions of the known world. Caravans moved north towards Syria and south toward Yemen. Goods traveled vast distances. Wealth changed hands. Alliances formed and collapsed. Commerce was not a side activity. It was the lifeblood of society. A merchant's reputation could determine whether families prospered or suffered. Trust was currency, and trust was fragile. A single dishonest transaction could damage a name for years. This was the world in which Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came of age. Long before revelation, people knew him by another title, Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. Think about that for a moment. This title was not given by believers. There were no Muslims yet. It was not awarded by followers. He had none. It was given by ordinary people who interacted with him in everyday life. People who bought and sold. People who observed. People who watched. They saw something unusual. A man whose word could be trusted. A man who did not deceive. A man whose character remained steady, whether the transaction was large or small. And perhaps that is where the first lesson begins. Before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entrusted him with revelation, people had already learned they could trust him with ordinary responsibilities. Today, many people dream of influence, leadership, of being heard. But the Seerah presents a different sequence. Trust comes before influence. Character comes before authority. Responsibility comes before leadership. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not suddenly become trustworthy after revelation. He was already trustworthy. The revelation elevated a character that had already been refined. And nowhere was that character tested more consistently than in commerce. Because trade reveals things about people. It reveals greed, patience, integrity, self-control. A person may appear noble when nothing is at stake. The marketplace introduces stakes, money, reputation, advantage, opportunity. Under that pressure, character becomes visible. Every transaction becomes a test. Every promise becomes a test. The second lesson emerges when we consider Khadijah radiallahu anha. Few figures in Islamic history command as much respect. She was intelligent, successful, respected, and she possessed something many people overlook. She possessed options. She was not forced to work with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She chose to. According to the well-known accounts of the Seerah, she entrusted him with her business affairs because of his reputation. Not because he held political power, not because he controlled armies, because he was trusted. In modern language, we often speak about networking, personal branding, visibility. Yet one of the most important opportunities in the Prophet's life came through something much simpler, a reputation, built slowly, patiently, over years. We live in an age obsessed with speed, instant success, instant recognition. The Seerah points in another direction. The most valuable things are built gradually. A reputation earned over years can open doors that money cannot. And in the case of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that reputation connected him to the woman who would become his greatest supporter during the earliest and most difficult years of Islam. Again, preparation appears before revelation. The foundations are laid before the mission begins. But there is another dimension that is often overlooked. Trade teaches responsibility. A caravan journey was not a casual undertaking. Goods represented livelihoods, investments, months or years of labor. One mistake could produce devastating consequences. To manage such responsibilities required judgment, discipline, reliability, and sound decision-making. These are not merely business skills, they are leadership skills. And leadership would soon become essential. Because revelation would not simply transform Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam into a teacher. It would transform him into the leader of a community, a statesman, a judge, a negotiator, a caretaker of people. The responsibilities would become enormous. When viewed from that perspective, the years before revelation begin to look less like a waiting period and more like a training ground. Not training in a classroom, training through life itself, through responsibility, through human interaction, through experience. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have chosen many paths for His messenger, yet the path we see in the Seerah includes work, effort, commerce, and deep engagement with society. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not isolated from the realities of ordinary people. He understood work because he worked. He understood trust because he earned it. He understood hardship because he experienced it. And that matters, because the message of Islam was never intended for monasteries alone. It was intended for merchants, farmers, craftsmen, parents, workers, leaders, real people living real lives. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam understood those lives because he had lived among them. Then something extraordinary happens. The revelation arrives, the cave, the command to read, the beginning of prophethood. And yet notice something remarkable. The trust people had placed in him does not disappear. Even his opponents struggle to accuse him of dishonesty. They reject his message. They oppose him fiercely, but they know his character. Years of integrity stand behind his words. The moral credibility built before revelation becomes part of the foundation upon which the message is delivered. This does not mean people accepted Islam because he was a merchant. His true purpose was prophethood. His true mission was revelation. But the years before that revelation contain lessons that remain deeply relevant today. especially in a time when many people separate faith from everyday conduct. The marketplace is often viewed as one world, religion as another. The Seerah challenges that division entirely. The same man who stood in prayer at night was trusted in business during the day. The same man who received revelation was known for honesty in transactions. The lessons were not separate. They were connected, always connected. And perhaps this is where the story speaks most directly to us. Many people ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for greater opportunities, greater influence, greater provision. But the Seerah invites a different question. What are we doing with the responsibilities already in our hands? Because before the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam carried revelation to humanity, he carried smaller responsibilities faithfully. Before people followed him, they trusted him. Before he led a civilization, he demonstrated integrity in ordinary transactions. The pattern is difficult to ignore. Faithfulness in small matters precedes faithfulness in larger ones. Character precedes influence. Trust precedes leadership. The years before revelation were not years of obscurity. They were years of formation. And perhaps that is the hidden lesson. Not that Allah chose a merchant instead of something else. Only Allah truly knows the full wisdom behind his choices. But when we look at the life of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam before revelation, we see qualities being refined that would later become essential to his mission. Trustworthiness, responsibility, patience, integrity, steadiness. Qualities tested repeatedly in the marketplace. Qualities that remained unchanged when revelation arrived. Today, many people search for extraordinary opportunities, yet the Seerah quietly directs our attention toward ordinary faithfulness. The promise kept, the contract honored, the truth spoken when it was inconvenient, the responsibility fulfilled when no one was watching. These actions rarely attract attention, yet they helped shape the character of the man who would become the final messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And perhaps that is why the story remains so powerful, because it reminds us that greatness is not built in a single moment. It is built through thousands of choices, quiet choices, repeated choices, choices made when nobody is watching. The people of Mecca saw those choices. They gave him a name, Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. And long before revelation descended from the heavens, that title was already echoing through the markets of the earth. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would eventually change history. But before he changed history, he earned trust. Before he guided nations, he honored commitments. Before revelation transformed the world, character was already being formed. The years of preparation are not wasted years. The unnoticed years are not forgotten years. The quiet years matter. Wallahu alam. And Allah knows best.